Hi there, welcome back to the channel. Today, well, you've read the title, snakes, and I'm talking about audio snakes. I'm mostly going to tell you about snakes that you can use in the studio, and I have 6 of the snakes that I have used over the years with me today, and I'm going to show you those. I have probably over 24 snakes, not all of them in use right now, but back when I had a ton of gear, a ton of hardware gear, I was using them. So I'm going to talk about those. I'll touch briefly on snakes for live sound, just so we can have a comparison. I'm going to talk about the size, the shapes, the lengths, the different connectors that you can get. I'm also going to talk about quality versus price, what you get, what you don't get, what you should consider avoiding, possibly if you want reliability. And last but not least, kind of a snake hack, if you will. All the different types of signals that you can send through snakes that you might need to do in the studio. Some of them are what I would say ill-advised. Other ones actually work out pretty well. Let me go ahead and start showing you these 6 snakes that I have here, and we'll talk price, shapes, design, durability, all that kind of stuff, and see where we end up. I might disappear off camera just a little bit so I can go grab these. This is probably the least expensive snake I have, and I actually had to take this out of my system because I only own a couple of these and they're all in use. On one end it has female XLR, and on the other end it has male XLR, and they're the locking type with the little cutaway here, so that when you plug it in, a little tab comes through there, and if you want to pull it out, you have to press on a button. This is only about a 3-footer, and it's very handy. It's only 4 conductors, but I'm only dealing with 1 cable, and it's great for hooking up some of my gear. My Army UFX audio interface has 4 XLRs on the front, and so these go into that, these go to the back of the rack, and 2 of them go into a preamp, and the other 2 go into a Korg Wavestation AD. Yes, it actually has XLR out. So that's pretty cool, and rather than having 4 cables, I essentially only have 1. That's a 1 for 4. That's a pretty good trade-off. This cable is made by Monoprice. I think I paid about $10 for it. I'll see if I can find it on YouTube, and I'll throw it up on the screen so you can see what the current price is on it. They also make 1/4-inch versions of this cable. I'm not sure if Monoprice does, but I know that other companies do. I think Seismic Audio makes a 4-channel version of this with 1/4-inch connectors, if you want that instead. I believe those connectors are TRS, but of course you can use it with a tip and a sleeve application if you need to. So this is a pretty cool cable, small, reasonably priced, good quality connectors too. If I remember, these unscrew. So they're user serviceable, and of course, if any of these completely fail, there's enough cable here that I could just cut it off and reconnect one if I wanted to do that. Next up, I think this is a 6-footer. I used this a long time ago when we had a Fostex 8-track reel. So this is probably 30 years old, this cable. It's RCA on one end and RCA on the other. And this would go to the Fostex, and this would go to the mixing console, which had RCA input. So it was perfect. I think it had RCA and 1/4-inch input, so you had a choice. It's only a 6-footer, but it's better to just have 1 core like this and then these ends on it. Made it very handy. Now, snakes come in all kinds of quality. What's interesting about this is if you, let me see if I put that up close, you can see that that's a molded plastic end. It's not going to be user serviceable. I just showed you I was able to unscrew the other connector, and I could go back in there and resolder the joints. Can't do that with this guy right here. With this guy, if it fails, you're not done, but what you'll have to do is cut it off and reconnect your own. And that means some soldering if you know how to do that. You'd have to buy a connector. And they're really cheap, but you know, it's a little bit of a hassle. The ones that are user serviceable are so much better. And I'm going to show you some snakes in a minute where we have some different types of connectors that are user serviceable. This is a 6-footer, very handy back in the day. This one right here is a variant of the one we just saw. On one end, it has RCA connectors. Once again, they're molded plastic, so they're not user serviceable. On the other end, we have 1/4 inch, and you can see it's just a tip and a ring. It doesn't have a sleeve here. It doesn't have another isolator and another conductor in the center. So these are unbalanced connectors. This was a snake that I used when I moved to a different mixing console that didn't have RCA inputs on it. It was a more professional console. And we were still using the 8-track tape machine, the reel-to-reel, back in the early 90s. And so these RCA ends went to the end of that, went into that tape recorder, and then these 1/4 inches went into the board. It's, I think it said it was 6 foot, but I think this is probably 8 or 10 feet. It's a little bit longer than that. You'll also notice here that there's a shrink wrap portion, and let me put that up close so you can see it. Hopefully that was in focus. This shrink wrap here makes sure that the cable doesn't slide backwards and forwards. If they didn't put this on here, the cable could get pulled through the sheath if you pulled on it pretty hard. One thing that will happen with these sheaths, eventually they'll start to loosen up around the big core here. You can take a heat gun, and in some cases you might be able to get away with a hair dryer set to high, and you can re-shrink this on there to tighten it down. Just make sure you push it on nice and tight. So that can be very useful. This cable here is the same as the previous cable as far as the connectors are concerned. It's a little bit shorter. The reason why I wanted to show you this one is because I made some modifications to it. And this is something that you might have to deal with. I was plugging this into a rack mount stereo system at the time. And then eventually I plugged it into a rack mount set of gear like I have behind me, 2 19-inch racks joined together. And the problem was I couldn't reach all the different devices in the rack. So what I had to do is I had to strip back some of this sheathing here, which was pretty easy to do. I just cut it with a knife, and then when I got it so far down, I just cut it around with a pair of scissors. If I'd thought about it and done it right, what I would have done is I would have disconnected the shrink wrap from it, and you can twist this enough and it'll come off. Then I would have pulled it down. Then I could have put this shrink wrap back on and tightened it down. That would have been a better way to do it. But this is a shorter cable, 6-footer. It was very useful in the day. I don't think I've used this in a while, but I still have it. This is another, I think, 10-footer. This one is 1/4 inch to 1/4 inch. And these are unbalanced connectors. You can see there's just a tip and a sleeve. There's no ring on it. And I do have some that are RTS, but this was a pretty handy cable for connecting keyboards. So at one time I had 5 3-tier racks in this studio up against the wall, and I would plug this into one set, one keyboard, and this into another set of keyboards, and then another set into another set of keyboards. And so it was really useful. And then I would run this to a drop snake. And I'll show you what a drop snake is in a minute. So this was very handy for wiring up the studio. I remember on one of these cables, I had to cut it back just like I showed you on that last snake, because I couldn't get all of these to plug in to all the different keyboards on that 3-tier rack. They were too far apart. I wanted them so they would be playable. If I wanted to, I could have put the tiers very close together, but I wouldn't have been able to have gone over and played them. So I pulled them apart. And at that point, it was important for me to just basically cut the sheathing back so all the cable connectors would reach. You'll notice that this one is not color-coded, and that's because the actual cables are labeled. Let me see if I can show you this. I don't know if this is going to show up on camera, but this one says 4 on it. So that works pretty well. I would say in a darkened studio environment, it's a difficult choice. You know, I like black on white or white on black. I like high contrast, which is why I like my Kronos. But there have been times in a darkened studio, my studio is dark, that this isn't as easy to see as maybe a yellow cable versus a red cable or a black cable. So some of the color-coded ones can be better. But this is a much better quality cable. And you can also see that these are user serviceable. I can unscrew them and I can get access to them. There is a strain relief on this, but it's very, very short. You can see that, if you can see that black segment there, right here, there's a very short piece of strain relief. That is not super high quality, and this was a pretty affordable cable if I remember. I think it was probably about $90. But having it so that I can disassemble it, if the solder joint gets dry and gets loose and then it's intermittent, I can go in there and rerun the solder, and that can really help. Anyway, this has been a pretty useful cable, and it's just not being used right now because I don't have as much gear as I used to have. Last but not least out of our 6 snakes is this drop snake. This one actually has a box, and it's heavy duty metal. This box is part weapon, part box. Let me get this up close so that you can see it. And you'll notice it's got Nutrix connectors on it, and that is very important. So I can plug XLR connectors into here, or I can plug in 1/4 inch. And of course, it's balanced connectors for the 1/4 inch. You can use unbalanced if you want, but it does have 3 cores, so it will take balanced connectors. On the other end, it has balanced 1/4 inch. And these are user serviceable. And unlike the other one that I just had, let me pick one that's a different color, because white it's harder to see. Let's use the red one here. You can see there's quite a bit of strain relief. The strain relief here comes way out of the connector. That's much better. What I would like for it to do is be slightly larger than the hole it's going through, so it's kind of held in there with friction. But that would make it harder to get the cap off and do any resoldering. So I understand why they didn't do it. This is an expensive snake. I think I paid $235 for this snake. It's 25 feet long. Now they go for, I think, $279. And I own 2 of them. One is in service over here behind the camera. You don't see it. And this one I'm not using right now, but I'll probably buy some more hardware at some time. time, and I'm going to need it, so I'm not going to get rid of it. It is expensive, but I think it's worth it. Now, for some people, if you're still building out your studio, you might think to yourself, $250 for a snake or $50 for a snake, I could be spending that money towards a synthesizer or a drum machine. And I get it. You have to get to a certain point where you have enough gear and now your priorities turn to other areas or other aspects of your studio. I talked about the quality here. Molded plugs that you can't use or service are going to be cheaper. HOSA, H-O-S-A, makes a lot of very inexpensive snakes. Proco, Seismic Audio, they're a little bit more high-end, but you need to be on the lookout for the types of materials that are being used. Also, the length. Often there's a sweet spot on the length, 6 to 10 feet, and then cables that are really short tend to be more expensive and have a premium. That's not unusual. You can pick up snakes in 4, 8 channels for mostly studio use, and then obviously for live use, 16, 12, 16, 20, 24, 32 channel snakes. Live snakes can be used in the studio. There's no reason really why you can't use a live snake. The biggest problem with live snakes, from my experience, is that they generally have a plethora of XLRs, but very few 1/4-inch connectors, and most keyboards are 1/4-inch out. So that makes them difficult to use. You need an adapter, and it just doesn't make any sense. That's why I like that Proco drop snake that I have. It's 1/4-inch and XLR because it uses Nutrix connectors, and I wish more manufacturers use those connectors. They're a lot more useful. Let's talk about what kinds of signals you can send through your snake. Obviously, audio signals. And it doesn't matter which way they're going. They can be going to or from. That's not an issue. Another very cool signal to send through a snake is MIDI. A lot of people don't realize that even though a standard original connector for MIDI was a 5-pin DIN that looked something like that, only 3 of those connectors are used. So if you have a snake which has balanced connectors or XLR, there is going to be a solution because there's 3 conductors there, and so you can send MIDI down the snake. Now you're going to need an adapter on one end and an adapter on the other, and I'll put up some variants of those on the screen so you can see them. They cost about $10, round about that price, $10 to $12, depending on the kind of quality you get. And you can send MIDI down your snake. And for me, going from the rack here all the way around to the other side of the room, at one time I was sending MIDI down through a snake. And you might say, but then I've got to use up a ton of my channels. Well, not really, because unlike audio with MIDI, you can daisy chain your devices together. You might get a tiny bit of latency that way, but probably not noticeable enough for it to make a difference to you. Other signals that you can send down an audio snake include SPDIF. It's not really advised, but it can be done. I've done it. But like I said, not advisable, but it can be done. Also AES EBU, because generally that is connected with an XLR connector. But you know, there's certain impedances that need to be required on certain cables for a lot of this digital connectivity to be reliable. But in a pinch, you can do it. And once again, I've done it with AES EBU. Don't recommend it. Also, one thing I didn't say about MIDI is the MIDI spec allows you to have a cable of about 10 meters in length. So that's about 30 feet. Once you get it beyond about 20 feet in length for a MIDI cable, you can start to have problems. It's really dependent on the quality of the cable and how much drive there is behind the MIDI output. And I've done it. I did it over that snake you just saw down here. I was using this at one time, this drop snake, to send MIDI on the 8th channel here, and that got it to a rack. This is a 25-foot cable, and I never had any problems with it. But, you know, just be advised that 30 feet is the theoretical limit. I've heard of people sending MIDI signals over 50 feet. Now, there are ways around going beyond the maximum length, and if you're having problems, you'd want to do that. There are repeaters that you can get for MIDI. I did an episode on Anatech's Pocket series, and they actually had a MIDI repeating system. They also had a system for sending MIDI down an XLR cable. But like I just said, you don't need to buy one of their boxes. You can just buy 2 adapters and you're in business. Also, if you have a MIDI junction router like a Yamaha MJC8 or an MX8 from Digital Music Corp or a JL Cooper, any of those you can send to that. It can receive the MIDI and then retransmit it, and now it's a fresh signal again, so it'll get another 10 meters or 30 feet. So that's it for this episode. Hopefully this was helpful. The number one reason for me using snakes in the studio is not to save money. It's to get rid of all the clutter, all those different cables going everywhere. Now, obviously, you're probably going to have other types of cables if you have a fairly complex studio like I do. ADAT, SPDIF, AES EBU, audio monitors, video monitors, computer cables, networking. I mean, cables are just unavoidable. So anytime I can just reduce that number, I'm all for it. And that's why I think this can be a very helpful episode. If you haven't looked into using snakes, whether it's a little 4-channel snake with 1/4-inch ends or XLR ends, you know, they're not that expensive and they really do reduce the clutter. Anyway, thanks for stopping by. Hopefully this was helpful. Take care, and I'll see you in another episode soon. Bye now.